Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Let me just do a quick update on what's been going on in Sudan and what might be happening in Sudan. Remember when I said in an earlier video, once the guns are drawn, it can be difficult to get them put back in the holsters again? Well, I think that's what's going on right now. I think that the UAE and Saudi Arabia thought that this would go better. This isn't the first misstep, by the way, of Saudi Arabia and UAE. The boycott of Qatar was a misstep. That didn't work. No one thought that Qatar was going to come through that boycott as strongly as they did, but they actually flourished and thrived during that time. So this isn't the first time that they've made a misstep, and it's not the first time that a coup didn't go the way the organizers of the coup thought it would go. Best example maybe is what happened in Turkey a few years back when the US-backed and US-approved Gulen organization tried to overthrow the government of Erdogan. They were completely and utterly defeated. I don't think that the US saw that coming, and I think they believed what Gulen was telling them. And I think that in this case, the UAE and Saudi Arabia believed what the RSF was telling them, and then America, the UK, and Norway believed what the UAE and Saudi Arabia were telling them through the RSF, that this is going to be a cakewalk and they're going to be able to take the government very quickly. And they did do very well initially, but they didn't anticipate the extent to which the Sudanese army was going to fight back. Now, reportedly, the U.S. embassy in Khartoum was fired upon by RSF rebels, and the U.S. ambassador was allegedly attacked in his home. I don't have any idea whether or not that information is true. The RSF is saying that that was a false flag operation by the Sudanese military. Sudanese military, of course, is blaming them, and who knows what really happened. So if the RSF actually did do that, then of course that would indicate that they are not working for the Americans. But of course they immediately stated that they didn't do that, which would indicate that they don't want the Americans to be alienated from them. And this is what I think. I think that the UAE and Saudi Arabia set this up, said that it's going to go well, told the Americans, don't worry about it, the RSF is going to take over, everything's going to be fine, and your interests will be protected, we'll safeguard your interests. And they're telling the same thing to UK and to Norway and to Russia and China, who also have significant interests, obviously, in Sudan. For the Russians, including a naval base that was just approved. But I think that things are getting out of hand. I think it's still too early to call this a civil war. But it's being called a civil war in the Western media, which I find a bit troubling. It sounds like they would like it to be a civil war, which again is what I was saying earlier. America would be very happy to see Sudan fall into the status of being another Somalia or Syria or Libya. So they're already hyping it up as a civil war when it's only been going on for a few days, and it's just between a relatively small faction compared to the Sudanese army, a relatively small faction fighting against the Sudanese army. The general public is not involved as yet, as far as I know. They've called for a ceasefire, which there are varying reports about the extent to which anyone is abiding by the ceasefire. In my opinion, they're calling for a ceasefire, not for any humanitarian reasons, but so that they can regroup. Just like in a boxing match being fought in rounds, interrupted by the bell, so that the fighters can go back to their corners, get instruction from their coach, regroup, and so that the audience can take a bathroom break. So if the ceasefire is actually adhered to, you can expect that the RSF is going to be coordinating with the UAE and Saudi Arabia to get instructions, and the UAE and Saudi Arabia are going to be talking to the Americans and to the UK and the Europeans to see which way do you want this to go, because it's kind of gotten out of hand. The RSF has called for international support or international intervention. They wouldn't call for international intervention unless they felt that they had a reason to believe that the international community, which is another word for the West, might support them. The only reason that they would think that they might support them is because that has been guaranteed to them through that meeting that they had 48 hours before the coup was launched with the US, UK, and Norwegian envoys. So the indication to me still is that this coup was a project by the UAE and Saudi Arabia with the approval of the Americans, with the approval of the Europeans, with the approval of the UK, with obviously the tacit approval and probably some degree of coordination from Russia and China. But it hasn't gone the way they thought it was going to go, because the Sudanese army is too strong. So it may escalate at this point unless it can be resolved very quickly, and either RSF can get more backing through the UAE and Saudi Arabia, maybe through Wagner, to force the coup to success. Because if they don't force the coup to success, it will fail. And if it fails, then the question is this just now going to degenerate into an actual civil war, as the Americans would like to see it? Which again is maybe another reason why the Americans would have agreed to this plan in the first place, because worst case scenario for them, they just get to destroy Sudan. If the coup doesn't work, they can just let the situation devolve into strife and chaos, which they're fine with. Then the other option is for the UAE and Saudi Arabia and Egypt, which is a client of the UAE and Saudi Arabia. They have different priorities, yes, but Egypt is very unlikely to do anything against the wishes of their paymasters, really, their funders. They could cut loose the RSF and throw their backing behind the Burhan government. And presumably they will have plausible deniability about their involvement with the RSF, so they can look like, well, we didn't have anything to do with it and we came to your aid. And then they can, make it worth their while to be on side with the Emirates and with Saudi Arabia. It can go one of a few different ways. Either one, the Emirates and Saudi Arabia arrange for the RSF to get external support, probably through mercenaries. Or two, the Emirates and the UAE switch sides and cut RSF loose and let them be decimated and ingratiate themselves to the Burhan regime. Or three, the situation just escalates and it devolves into a civil war as per the desires of the United States. And Allahu Alam, and we pray for Sudan and our brothers and sisters in Sudan. Ya Rab, stay safe. Jazakum Allahu khairan wa assalamu alaikum.